Forget the toxic games and the public pride. What happened behind those closed doors wasn't a spectacle. It was the heartbreaking collapse of a human being. The moment the lie detector test ended, the cold, arrogant mask that Blueface wore for the world didn't just slip. It completely shattered into pieces. Nevaeh didn't find a rapper fighting for his image. She found a broken man on his knees, weeping at her feet, begging for forgiveness through heavy, desperate tears. When the truth finally caught up to him, the reality of the pain he caused hit like a physical blow. Seeing someone who seemed so untouchable completely reduced to nothing, sobbing, clinging to her, and pleading for a mercy he never gave her, is an image that changes everything. It wasn't about winning an argument. It was the agonizing sound of a soul realizing they've lost the only person who actually loved them. The betrayal was so heavy, the grief in that room so suffocating, it will completely tear you apart. This is the raw, unedited heartbreak of the moment the truth finally broke him. The silence that followed the final question of that lie detector test wasn't just quiet, it was suffocating. For months, the entire world watched this relationship play out like a twisted reality show, a continuous cycle of chaos, screaming matches, and public defiance. But when the cameras stopped rolling and the technicians began packing up their wires, the reality of what they had just done crashed down upon the room like a tidal wave. Nevaeh sat there, completely drained, her eyes fixed on the floor as the weight of the results settled into her bones. She had spent so long fighting for the truth, crying herself to sleep while the internet laughed, mocked her, and told her she was crazy for holding on to a man who clearly didn't value her. But deep down, she always knew. She knew the lies he was spinning, she knew the secrets he was keeping, and she knew the agonizing pain of loving someone who constantly made her feel invisible. Yet, nothing could have prepared her for the sheer, unadulterated devastation that was about to unfold the very second they were left alone in that cold, empty room. Blueface had always been the ultimate manipulator, a man who wore his arrogance like armor. He built an entire empire on the concept of being unbothered, untouchable, and completely devoid of remorse. To his millions of fans, he was the guy who laughed in the face of accountability, the rapper who treated women like accessories and loyalty like a joke. But the moment those heavy studio doors clicked shut, that armor didn't just crack, it completely disintegrated. Nevaeh describes a transformation that was as terrifying as it was deeply tragic. The loud, mocking voice that had filled the internet for years suddenly vanished, replaced by a heavy, shaking breath. He looked at her, and for the first time in their entire history, the mask was gone. There was no swagger, no smug smile, and no security guards to hide behind. There was only a man staring into the abyss of his own mistakes, realizing that the house of cards he had built on deceit was finally collapsing around him. What happened next is an image that will forever be burned into Nevaeh's mind. A moment so intensely painful it shatters any perception of who this man was to the public. Blueface didn't try to argue. He didn't try to make excuses or gaslight her into believing the machine was wrong. Instead, his knees gave out. The man who claimed he would never bow down to anyone dropped straight to the floor, his heavy frame collapsing right at her feet. Nevaeh watched in absolute horror as he reached out, his hands trembling violently as he grabbed onto her shoes, clinging to her like a drowning man desperately reaching for a lifeline. And then the crying started. It wasn't a quiet, composed tear rolling down his cheek. It was a deep, guttural, suffocating sob that shook his entire chest. He wept into the fabric of her jeans, his voice breaking into 1,000 pieces as he begged her, over and over again, not to abandon him. He was a grown man, completely reduced to nothing, whimpering for a mercy that he had denied her for years. For Nevaeh, looking down at him in that state was a form of emotional torture. This was the man who had broken her heart into 1,000,000 pieces, the man who had humiliated her on a global stage. Yet seeing him so completely broken didn't feel like a victory. It felt like grief. The sorrow in that room was so heavy it felt physically difficult to breathe. He kept screaming through his tears, asking how things had gotten this bad, how he had allowed himself to destroy the only genuine love he ever had in his life. He confessed to things he had denied for months, his voice cracked with a desperation that was terrifying to witness. He begged her to stay, promising that he would change, that he would fix everything, that he would leave the fame and the toxicity behind if she would just hold his hand through the dark. It was the sound of a soul realizing, with absolute certainty, that they had pushed the person who loved them too far, and that the damage was completely irreversible. The betrayal didn't just hurt, it tore through her chest like glass. As he lay there weeping at her feet, Nevaeh felt a profound, aching emptiness. She realized that all the anger she had carried was just a shield for a sadness, so deep it could never be washed away. He had traded her peace, her dignity, and her heart for a temporary thrill. And now that the thrill was gone, all that remained was the bleeding wreckage of two people who had destroyed each other in the name of love. The grief in that room was absolute. It was the agonizing realization that sometimes the truth doesn't set you free. It just shows you exactly how much you've lost, leaving you standing in the ruins of a love that was always meant to break you. As the minutes ticked away in that locked room, the absolute horror of the situation only deepened. Blueface remained on the floor, his fingers desperately gripping the edge of her clothes, as if letting go meant disappearing into the dark forever. The raw agony of his sobbing filled every corner of the space, a sound so heavy and haunting it felt like it was tearing the very air apart. Nevaeh stood completely frozen, looking down at the man who had once been her entire world, the man who had sworn he would never let anyone see him weak. To see him like this, stripped of his pride, gasping for air between choked apologies and trembling with a deep existential terror, was a sight that completely shattered her spirit. It was the ultimate tragedy of a toxic love. The moment where the abuser realizes they have finally pushed their victim past the point of no return, and the sudden, overwhelming panic of abandonment sets in. He began to pour his heart out in a way he had never done before, his voice cracking with a terrifying level of desperation. He confessed to the sleepless nights, the crushing anxiety that he masked with alcohol and internet fights, and the sickening guilt that ate away at him every single time he looked into her eyes after lying to her face. He admitted that the lie detector test wasn't just a publicity stunt for him. It was a nightmare he knew he couldn't escape. He told her that he had lied for so long that he had almost started believing his own delusions. But seeing the digital screen confirm his betrayal in front of the world had completely broken his mind. He kept repeating her name over and over, like a prayer from a dying man, begging her to look at him, to touch his hair, to tell him that they could somehow find a way back from the edge of this abyss. But the emotional damage was already done, and the weight of his words felt like lead falling on an open wound. Nevaeh felt a cold, dead numbness spreading through her chest. Every tear he shed felt like a reminder of the thousands of tears she had cried alone in hotel rooms and empty houses while he was out celebrating his sins. She remembered the nights she begged him for the truth, the times she pleaded with him just to be honest with her so they could heal, only to be met with cold laughter, mockery, and brutal gaslighting. Now, seeing him beg for the exact same mercy he had so ruthlessly denied her for years didn't bring her peace. It only highlighted the sickening unfairness of it all. The grief in that room became so thick, so suffocating, it felt like standing in the middle of a burning building with nowhere left to run. He started making promises that sounded less like plans and more like the frantic screams of a drowning person. He told her he would delete his social media accounts, that he would cancel his upcoming shows, and that he would walk away from the music industry entirely if it meant keeping her. He swore he would go to therapy, that he would get down on his knees in front of her family and beg for their forgiveness, and that he would spend every single day for the rest of his life making up for the agony he had put her through. His voice was raw, his throat burning from the intensity of his weeping as he laid his entire soul bare at her feet. It was a terrifying display of a man completely unraveled, a millionaire rap star reduced to a weeping child, terrified of the silence that would follow when she finally walked out that door. Yet beneath his desperate pleas, Nevaeh could hear the underlying truth. It wasn't just about losing her. It was about the terror of facing himself. Without her to blame, without her to use as a shield against his own demons, he was forced to look directly into the mirror and see the monster he had become. The betrayal had cut so deep that it had severed the very fiber of their connection. As he clutched her knees, weeping so hard he began to choke, she realized with a devastating certainty that love was no longer enough. You cannot rebuild a home out of the ashes of a person you intentionally set on fire. The atmosphere in that studio was pure, unadulterated heartbreak. The agonizing sound of a love story dying in the darkest, most pathetic way possible, leaving nothing but two broken souls drowning in a sea of irremediable regret. The heavy air in that room didn't just feel cold anymore. It felt like a final goodbye. Every single word Blueface muttered from the floor was soaked in a deep, agonizing regret that came far too late. He looked up at her, his eyes bloodshot, his face stained with tears, searching her expression for even a flicker of the warmth he had spent years taking for granted. But there was nothing left. Nevaeh's face was an absolute mask of sorrow, a silent testament to a heart that had been broken one too many times. The absolute tragedy of that moment was the realization that he was looking at a ghost. The ghost of the girl who would have moved mountains for him. The girl who would have defended him against the entire world, now completely gone, replaced by a woman who was simply too tired to hurt anymore. He reached for her hands, his fingers trembling violently as he tried to intertwine them with hers. But her fingers remained limp, refusing to hold him back. It was in that exact moment that the true panic seemed to set in for him. He began to whisper, his voice a broken, raspy shadow of its former self, confessing to the ultimate horror of his actions. He admitted that every time he had publicly humiliated her, every time he had let the internet laugh at her expense, a part of him died inside. He confessed that he was deeply envious of her purity, of her ability to love so unconditionally, and that his own inability to be good had made him want to destroy the goodness in her. It was a sickening, heartbreaking confession. The raw truth of a predator realizing he had destroyed the only beautiful thing he ever possessed. The silence that settled between his desperate gasps for air was louder than any screaming match they had ever had. Nevaeh felt the weight of every single lonely night she had survived rushing back into her mind. She thought about the endless promises, the empty apologies, and the cycle of abuse that had kept her trapped in a loop of perpetual grief. She realized that if she stayed now, if she allowed his tears to wash away the stains of his betrayal, she would be signing the death warrant for her own soul. Looking at him weeping at her feet didn't make her feel powerful. It made her feel an overwhelming, crushing sense of pity. It was the ultimate heartbreak. Realizing that the person you loved with everything inside you is completely broken, and that you cannot fix them without destroying yourself in the process. He began to notice her withdrawal, the subtle way she stepped back, forcing his hands to slide off her shoes and fall heavily back onto the cold floor. The desperation shifted into a quiet, terrifying hopelessness. He stopped begging. His shoulders slumped, his head fell forward against his chest, and he just sat there in the wreckage of his own making, breathing heavily. The silence in the room was absolute, a heavy, suffocating blanket of grief that marked the end of an era. He knew, without her even saying a word, that the thread had snapped. The man who had entered that lie detector room thinking he could conquer the world and manipulate the truth was now sitting in the ruins of his reality, completely alone, even with her standing right in front of him. As she slowly turned toward the door, every step felt like she was dragging an impossible weight behind her. The physical act of walking away from the person who used to be your entire universe is a pain that tears through your chest like a knife. She didn't look back, because she knew if she saw his tears one more time, the residual love she carried might trick her into staying in that burning house. The atmosphere in that final moment was pure, unadulterated devastation. The quiet, agonizing death of a love that was meant to be forever, but was instead sacrificed on the altar of pride and deceit. She opened the door, stepping out into the hallway, leaving him behind in the darkness of the room, completely broken, weeping into the empty space where her love used to live. If your heart is heavy after hearing this, you are not alone. What we just witnessed isn't just internet gossip. It is the tragic, agonizing reality of what happens when a toxic love finally burns itself down to the ground. It forces us to look into the mirror and ask ourselves the hardest question of all. How much of your own soul are you willing to sacrifice just to save someone who is committed to destroying you? Nevaeh's choice to walk out that door wasn't a sign of weakness. It was the ultimate, painful act of survival. But now, the story belongs to you, and the conversation happens down below. I want you to take a moment, step away from the memes and the laughter on social media, and tell me your honest thoughts in the comments. Do you believe Blueface's tears were real, or was it just the final, desperate act of a master manipulator who realized he had completely lost control of his narrative? Can a relationship ever truly recover once the truth has utterly shattered the foundation? Or was Nevaeh right to leave him broken in that room? Your voice matters here, and your perspectives help keep this community grounded in real emotion. If this deep dive moved you, if it touched a chord in your heart, please hit that like button. It helps spread this message to others who might need to hear it. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you never miss the next intense chapter of these untold stories. Thank you so much for watching, for sharing your heart in the comments, and for being here. Stay strong, protect your peace, and I will see you in the next video.